my name is Anne-Sophie. I'm recording this in May 2022, and I wanted today to walk you through a dataviz that I've created called Pleasing the Experts, Appealing to the Masses, Jury versus Public Vote in Eurovision. Now, I wanted to walk you through this piece because I'm a massive fan of the Eurovision Song Contest, and it's happening this week. My favorite part of the whole competition is when the final votes are broadcast, because we start by providing the jury votes country by country, all orderly, and then what happens is that the televoting are announced, and when the votes from the audience are announced, it usually completely flips over the ranking that the juries provided to the entries. The winner keeps changing until the last minute, ensuring massive drama and suspense. And why? Perhaps because the audience and the juries don't necessarily have the same criteria for what they call a successful and a winning entry. So that's what we're going to look into today. We're going to see if there's some patterns. But maybe you've never heard of the Eurovision Song Contest, or maybe you've heard of it, but you never watched it. So I need to give you just a couple of heads up about the voting system so that you're not lost in when I try to describe it a bit in more details. So the most important rule to remember about the Eurovision Song Contest is that since 2009, professional juries were reintroduced. And what that means is that the vote of a country is divided into two equal parts. 50% of the votes are provided by a jury, and 50% are provided by the audience. So the audience can call or send text, SMS, or vote via an app. Then two rules to remember is that each participating country during a year, and by the way, the list of countries participating change from one year to another. You don't have to come every year. But anyway, each country that is participating provides the same amount of points as another country. For instance, a big five, so UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, their votes have the same weight as a principality like San Marino. So the votes are equal. The second thing is you cannot vote for the country you represent or you reside in. So maybe by now you've guessed it. I am French, but I live in London. That means that I can actually vote for France because I do not reside in France. So I can, for instance, call or send a text to vote for what, but I cannot vote for the UK because that's the country where I reside in. So with all those rules that now you know and you understand about the voting system, now we can deep dive into how the jury and the audience votes differ and what does that mean for the Eurovision Song Contest entries. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to plot all the entries from the reintroduction of the juries, so from 2009 to 2021. And before I do that, one caveat though is there are 2 years that I cannot plot. The first one is 2020 because the competition was cancelled, and the second one is 2013. We were not provided the results details, jury and by jury and by audience, so I cannot plot that year. But we have 11 years of data, with loads of data points to analyze, so it's still going to be really interesting. So I've plotted all those entries in this scatter plot. So let me explain to you how to read this one. So on the x-axis, you have the percentage of the public vote from 0 to approximately 16. So how many points of the total points the public provided. And then on the y-axis, you have the percentage of the jury votes. So from 0 to 16.2, what is the percentage of the total votes that the jury gave, that they gave to a specific entry. And each dot represents an entry. And when the entry won, so was the top one entry of the year, it is represented by a little star. Now, what this scatter plot does is that it maps out if it's in the diagonal, in the diagonal that goes from 0 to, from the bottom left corner to the right corner, if it's on that diagonal, that means that the juries and the audience agreed, meaning that they liked equally the song. If it's on the top corner of the diagonal, that means that there were more percentage of points provided by the juries than by the audience. And on the other side, if it's on the bottom corner, it means that the song was preferred by the public, but maybe snubbed by the professionals. So I'm going to give you 3 examples to illustrate what I mean. The first one is we're going to look at an example where juries and audience agreed on a song. So both juries and audience gave 11% of their points to Barbara Pravi with Voila for France in 21. So that's here, that's this plot. Oh. That's the one. Now I'm going to give you an example where the juries and the audience did not agree at all. So in 2018, the Swedish entry, the juries gave 10% of their total votes, but the audience gave it less than 1%, so that's this dot. So that's a point where it was highly preferred by the juries, but disliked by the audience. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the case where a song was really loved by the audience, but disliked by the juries. And the best example I can think of is Spirit in the Sky by Norway in 2019. So that's an example where the jury gave less than 2%, but the public actually ranked it the top song, and they gave it 12% of the votes. So that, if you want to stop here and explore this, you can just pause this video and explore this chart. I would say probably on the desktop, because it's very hard to do that on the mobile, except if you have tiny fingers. But you can hover your mouse over the different stars and dots to know more about each of the songs. And when you're finished, you can come back to this video, or if you prefer, you can continue this video, because I'm going to show you now 4 notable patterns that I've noticed looking at this data in more details. Number 1, being the overall favorite of the audience is a better predictor of victory than being the overall favorite of the juries. Now, the jury and the audience votes, as I said, have exactly the same weight. We've established that. But it's interesting that usually what you want to do is to be the favorite of the audience and the favorite of the jury. But if you had to choose between being the favorite of the audience or the favorite of the jury, you'd better be the favorite of the audience, and I'll explain why. So there are cases in which jury and audiences align and they agree on the song being really, really good. And that's example here, when there's a little star in yellow, so that means that this is a winner, and you have a green circle because it's a favorite of the jury, and you have also a pink circle because it's a favorite of the audience. So here, you have a total alignment, same percentage of points provided by the audience and the public for Salvador Sobral in 2017 for Portugal. So my parents are Portuguese. I have to say I was really, really proud when Portugal won. It was the first year that they won ever. So that was a great moment for me to see that it was a favorite of both the audience and the public, and it had so many percentage of points. Now, moving on. There are cases where the public and the audience do not necessarily agree on who should win. And that's where it gets interesting. So 6 times out of the 11 last entries we were able to map out, the jury's favorite is the entry that won. So I have to say, it's quite a bit, more than half of the times the jury favorite won, including Sweden in 2019. But out of 11 times, the public's favorite won, which means that it's an even higher proportion of the public favorite that wins. And sometimes the public favorite is not the favorite of the jury. So for instance, in last year, Maneskin, the victory of Maneskin was really boosted by the audience, because if you hover, it says here that it was ranked first among the televoting, but only 4th of the jury voting. And I have to say, as a personal subjective comment, I'm not really surprised, because rock music doesn't tend to do very well in Eurovision from the at least for the juries. It does better with the tele audience, and that's interesting to see that in this case, it's a case where the jury thought the song was good. I mean, it was in the top 5, but not nearly as good as what the audience said. So in conclusion, being the overall favorite of the audience is a better predictor of victory than being the favorite of the jury. Number 2, English is a safer bet, but don't underestimate the audience's fondness for other languages. So, looking at the songs and the entries of Eurovision, a vast majority of the songs and entries are in English. So it's 70% of all songs, 75% of all winners. If you look at other languages, it's 20% of entries and only 17% of winners. And there's also the third category, which is songs that are a mix of English and other languages. They represent 10% of the entries, 8% of the victories. So the long story short is that English is probably a safer bet. But it's interesting that when you plot all the dots, the audience seems to enjoy more songs in or with local languages than the jury. And I have to say, I was a bit surprised by this one, because I was under the assumption that the jury would focus on the vocal, the performance of the singer, no matter what language was the song in, and that the audience needed English because it's more accessible to a lot of to a wide range of people across Europe. So I genuinely thought that it would be the other way around. But see, like, that's an assumption that I was able to debunk with some infographic and with some data. So that's an interesting point. I still think that English is a safer bet, but I am a big fan of a song in other languages, because what are the opportunities for us to hear, like, I don't know, disco in Estonian, or to hear, a ballad in Dutch? Not that often. So please send more songs in other languages, or just don't listen to me, because after all, the data is speaking for itself. So that was point number 2. English is a safer bet, but don't underestimate the audience fondness for other languages. Point number 3. Country preferences from juries and audiences don't have enough weight to guarantee a win. Now, block voting, bias voting is an extremely complex topic at Eurovision. And I've actually touched a bit upon it, like in my latest work, which was about jury voting. And I cannot completely give you a total answer. It's, again, very complex topic. But there are certain things that we can notice, certain patterns that we can actually highlight. But the long story short is that there's an ongoing controversy that Eurovision voting, especially the public one, is political, and voters get accused of favoring their neighbors by geography, history, or culture. We do see some patterns, but they are not as straightforward as you think, in my opinion. The first one is that the juries seem to, if you look at the dots for Australia, so in blue, it seems to always have the preference of the jury against the preference of the audience. So it's always in the zone of preferred by juries. And if you look at preferred by the audience, you have Russia, which really has clearly is more on the audience side. And sometimes also Poland, it's more discreet because there's less points given than Russia, but it's still there. You can see that it's systematically ranking better in final with the audience than it is with the jury. If I can pause here, talking about the data, and provide just for 2 minutes my subjective analysis on this, I personally wonder, and that's a hypothesis, if Australia is doing better with the jury because Australia tends to send entries with vocalists that are very high performance on terms of vocals, and maybe that's something that talks more to the juries. And Russia, I have to say, sends really some top-notch setting. There's always interesting sets, or there's a year where they send a grandmas on stage, and that's not something that you see often. So I think they're really good at sending something which is a show. So maybe that's why it's not necessarily just political. It could just be that it's a different. I'm not dismissing at all that there might be also the role of politics and geopolitics. I'm just saying it's a really, really complex topic. So take this as not a conclusion, but just something that is worth thinking about. Now, that being said, I'm gonna say this, and it's really interesting, is that if you notice very carefully the dots that I've plotted of the countries that are systematically preferred by the audience or systematically preferred by the jury, you notice one thing: none of them have had a victory since 2009. And that's really, really interesting, because slight preferences for a country, bias for a country, doesn't necessarily mean that you can win. It's not the end game. And this year Russia has been excluded of the competition. It can be quite interesting to see, okay, if this is a country which is usually favored by the audience, what's going to happen? Because here you have a gap, people are still going to vote, so who are we going to vote for? So that's where it gets really interesting. Moving on from geopolitics to our last point of our viz for today. I'm going to talk to you about the running order and the importance in a victory. So your place in the running order matters for everyone, but it matters more for the public votes. So here I have a completely different visual, so I'm going to explain it a bit. I have mapped the years, so the entries from 2009 to 2021, again excluding 2013 and 2020 for the reasons we discussed before. And what I have done is you have two circles. The first one in green is a percentage of the jury vote, and the one in pink is a percentage of public vote. And when there's a number, when the number is labeled here, you can see that means that it's the winning entry of the year. And what I've done also, oh sorry, I should have explained, the y-axis is the running order. So for instance, what song came first, second, last song of the finale, etc. And the reason why I wanted to plot this is because it is well known among people who are really into Eurovision, but if you're the first person who is singing at the competition, no matter what year, it's very hard to win when you're the first act. And one of the reasons for that is that when the public vote, you can't just pick up your phone at any point. The vote by the public only starts after the last performance of the finale, which means that by the entry number 26, or in this case 27, or in 2015, what happens is by that time, like, the audience have heard so many songs that it's much harder to remember the first act that came on stage. And because of that, it happens that, like, the audience tend to vote more for the entries that they've seen either among the last, or it seems to, for whatever reason, that 11, 10, and 12 seems to be also good places to sing. And what is interesting is that the jury voting happens in a prior session than the finale that is broadcasted on TV, but it's exactly the same running order. So you could think that the jury is also influenced by the running order. And they are also influenced, but a bit less than the televoting. And that's why, like, when the announcement of the running order is provided, the bookmakers tend to change their betting ratings, because it does matter in like if you're gonna win or if you're gonna lose, and how you're gonna rank in the Eurovision Song Contest. So this is what this viz is showing, is that your place in the running order matters, not only but especially for the public votes. That's it. That's my viz for today. Thank you very much for following. If you want to read my other analysis on jury voting and biases that I've published last year, I'm going to put the link here. And these are also my links to my social networks. Like all this work was done with the data that is provided by Wikipedia. I also wrote a blog about how I've created this viz using Tableau, Figma, Google Sheets, and that's pretty much it, I think. But I've wrote a blog post explaining everything about how I've created this. So, but if you have any questions or any comment, any feedback, don't hesitate. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy watching the finale of Eurovision this Saturday.